Hi there, and thanks for clicking on this video. My name is Stu Hume, Managing Editor of TPi Magazine, and as you might have seen from our previous newsletter, recently we ran a whole article on the development of wireless technology within the world of live touring with our friends for RG Jones. But we were keen to keep this conversation going, and thankfully Shure invited me down to his wonderful media hub to continue this conversation. So, Jack, could you just introduce yourself to the folks at home?
Hello, everybody. I'm Jack. I work in the market development team at Shure, and I specialize in high-tier wireless system deployments, designs, consultings, making certain that the people make the right choices when it comes to designing complex wireless systems, basically. That's what I do.
So obviously at TPI, our whole job basically is we go to some of the biggest wireless tours and kind of speak to every single department. And obviously wireless has become such a dominant conversation when we are speaking to the audio teams, and sometimes takes up more of the conversation than the mix itself because of the complex nature. Now, when it comes to wireless technology, for a long time it has been the microphone manufacturers that have kind of led the charge in terms of technology and development. Could you just give people an insight when it comes to Shure as a family, how big your kind of wireless team is and kind of the scope of that kind of size of the company compared to the famous microphones?
I mean, it's crazy because I'm only just starting to understand this myself. The way that we develop products, there's hundreds of people that are involved, especially like in 2026, where there's a lot of complexity to what's going on. So all of our wireless products, there is a manager, a product manager. They work in the global product management team, and they kind of run that product as their own little business almost. They're like the CEO of the entire project, pulling all the teams together. And then separate to them, there's an engineering team. So a product gets defined, it gets passed over to engineering. Engineering figure out how to actually build the thing. What hardware are we going to need? What components are we going to need? That then feeds into a whole supply planning conversation, which is another separate team. Finding chipsets, finding memory, that's quite a big discussion at the moment, right? Finding things that are going to work with other products that we've had out in the market maybe for 30 years in some cases. We want everything to be able to talk to each other as much as possible. So they have to figure all that side of it out. And then you start to get a hardware box built that starts to get, socialized with customers quite early. So we'll do things like alpha testing. And as part of that, generally speaking, it wants to sit on a network these days. Generally speaking, there has to be some kind of software to talk to it, which means that you then end up with a software team. And the software team is separate to the embedded systems team, right? The embedded firmware that are actually programming the FPGAs. But obviously, they have to talk to each other as well. And then they start to build systems to run the thing. And then we'll start to enter into discussions with people like me where we try and figure out how people actually want to use this stuff and how usable it wants to be. What features do people really want to have? And then once you've started to broadly define what that looks like, there's a compliance discussion that takes place. So everything we put out there has to be compliant to sell around the world. That's in terms of spectrum allocation, output power, but also things like power cords, right? Carnets, being able to ship stuff around the world. And it gets a compliance stamp to be sold. And eventually, somehow, at the end of all that, we get to the point where we can sell a product out into the market. So there are hundreds of people involved in that process. And it all kind of gets pulled together within this one family. We do pretty much all of that in-house. There's very little that we go outside of the business for. So, yeah, it's remarkable, really, when you see how this stuff works.
And just in terms of your background as well, as you've had a long history within the music industry, but I'm presuming an audio guy first and foremost, and has discovered kind of wireless throughout your job. How have you found that kind of journey of learning about this technology and kind of the development it's been on for the last decade or so?
So when you start understanding wireless systems, we start working with wireless systems, especially if you've come from an audio background, my journey has been quite funny. I started thinking that it was very different and the most complicated thing that I'd ever seen. You then start to understand, or I started to understand, that actually wireless systems is just audio. The science behind it is exactly the same. If you can walk up to a mixer and understand what the low cut does, what the EQ does, what the head amp gain does, what the output kind of fader is doing, how that matrixes into auxiliary outputs, main outputs, right, on a really simple analog mixing console. If you can understand that signal flow, and the physics, some of the physics of kind of what's happening in terms of where feedback comes from and where fundamental frequencies that give you feedback comes from. And the fact that if you're running speakers in a small room and you just keep turning them up, you're going to make the problem worse, right? As soon as you start understanding some of those concepts, wireless starts to become really easy. You start to see things in an audio capacity, and you start to understand that, yeah, all the things that make audio hard in a space and the solutions to making it better are exactly the same in terms of wireless. We tend to just call them different things, you know. So we talk about carrier to noise ratio instead of signal to noise ratio. Some of them are called the same things, right? We talk about gain structuring in exactly the same way.
Okay.
So that then gets really easy, and then you get to a point where the wireless bit is the easy bit, and actually integrating it into a complex network and having lots of separate endpoints that have to ultimately work together becomes the complicated bit. And then you start to become an IT systems engineer. And that's where we find myself today. And I am once again completely out of my depth, relying on other people who are much more intelligent than I am to help me with that side of things. And yeah, it's always a fascinating journey.
So, you know, we're now in 2026. In terms of we've always heard about all the various issues people have had when it comes to wireless, you know, the shrinking spectrum obviously being a big one. What are some of the, you know, right now, what are some of the biggest issues that audio engineers are facing when they're going out on the road?
Spectrum availability is a huge one. We've just had the call for input. If anybody at home contributed to the call for input, well done. If you didn't, if you're wondering what a CFI is or a call for input is, I will tell you. Basically, Ofcom's opened the book again to have another look at spectrum. So we had a 700 meg sell-off in 2020, which rolled out 5G services. And Ofcom have started to suggest they want to have a look at the future availability of spectrum in the UK specifically.
Oh, cool.
And they've started this by doing an industry CFI, an industry call for input. So us and I think 100 other people in the UK, including Mission Control and Terry Chew and RG Jones and others, all put into this call for input basically to say where the state of spectrum is at in the UK. And the fact, you know, we're trying to fit an awful lot into a very small space. If you go out and do scans of the 5G spectrum in the UK, you will see a lot of spectrum that the mobile companies aren't using. So, you know, you've already sold it off. There's spectrum availability there. They should probably use that. And also, if you want to take your tour in the UK to somewhere like America, for example, you will go from a tricky situation into, in some places, a completely unworkable situation. Like if you want to go to Mexico City, I was looking at some scans in Mexico City. There's like 2 6 meg bands available outdoors to coordinate potentially 150 channels of wireless. It's just really, really difficult.
Yeah.
So it's not just spectrum availability. I think also now it's understanding the different legislation in different countries, understanding what kit you can take around the world, how you have to take that around the world, and trying to build a show that ultimately is very flexible in terms of I can do the same show in the UK and my audience get the same type of show in the UK that they experience in Germany and Spain and Italy and America and South America and Japan, right? That is a huge question because the spectrum laws and spectrum availability in all those places does change.
And is there any kind of resource out there that kind of like, when we are talking about all these different kind of like international kind of touring locations that you can go to kind of like find it, what am I going to be able to use? What's going to be my problems?
All right, so Shure is one. We do an awful lot of work within our own software to try and help with this within Wireless Workbench. We've got something called the Scan Library.
Oh, cool.
So you can download scans from various places around the world. And if you're feeling friendly, you can upload scans as well. We highly encourage you to upload scans to the Scan Library. But I'm going to name check 2 non-Shure companies for a moment. I promise I'm not being paid to do this. One is not a company, it's a body called the APWPT. I don't remember what it stands for, but it's an excellent European body, and they do something called the frequency handout. So if you put APWPT into your web server of choice, you can scroll down to the handout, and it basically details local legislation for different countries, output power emissions, is there a regulator or not, what bits of spectrum are regulated, how is that regulation managed. The data generally is kind of 95% good, I would say. They update it pretty regularly. The other company that I want to call out is Mission Control, who I'm sure that you know.
Yeah, so Ali's actually in the article as well. So,
excellent. Yeah, I mean, Ali's fantastic. Sam is fantastic. They do really, really good work. If you're running a very complex tour and you want to have a level of indemnity, let's say, to the wireless planning side. You want somebody to look after that side of it for you and give you some guarantee that it's going to work. They are kind of the only name in town to do that, and they are the best at what they do as well. So if I was going out on a relatively large tour tomorrow, if I left the business and started going back out on the road again, 100% I'm working with Mission Control, because they've just got all the data.
Yeah.
And they've, in all of those countries, in many of those countries, they don't just know the local RF engineers, they know the legislators, right? They know the local authorities. So they have a huge amount of experience in moving this stuff around the world. And I think they've become a very important part now of actually executing some of those big shows.
Now, why this conversation was really kind of all the kind of stars aligned was when we kind of started talking about the wireless article that's in this latest issue of TPi Magazine, the latest firmware updates for ADPSM, we just announced in the press release. Could you just explain to the audience at home like what some of these kind of updates were? And well, I mean, maybe you could go back one step. In ADPSM, what is it?
Okay. ADPSM, Axient Digital PSM, personal stereo monitoring or personal stage monitoring, depending on which bit of the business you talk to. It's quite interesting, that one. PSM has always been our acronym for in-ear monitoring systems, right? So you go out on a stage, you are an artist, you have a receiver pack, just a little headphone amplifier with a wireless engine on it, and you plug your headphones in, and then you run around the stage and somebody's mixing your audio for you, right? We've always called that PSM systems. Historically, our top-tier PSM system has been 1000 series. We actually released that system, I believe, in 2011, I think. So it's a super old system now. When I do training on this, I say Apple had the iPad 2 when we launched PSM 1000, and now they've got iPad 16. So in the time that Apple's done 14 iPads, we've done one IEM system. But that gives you an idea as to why we felt we had to do it, because the ability to build hardware in 2011 is obviously very different. PSM 1000 is a very simple box. You walk up to it, it basically does one thing at 3 different power levels. If you are a relatively novice RF engineer, you can make a PSM 1000 system work very easily. You don't have to be an expert in this stuff to get it running. But it's very spectrum inefficient, so you can only really get 10 channels of it running in an 8 meg band. There's also some limitations in PSM 1000 in terms of, there's no digital input options, so people really wanted to run Dante. There's only one LAN connector on the whole thing. Actually, I think there might have been 2 by the time we discontinued the product. But regardless, it doesn't network very nicely, right? It wasn't really developed to be a product that works in that particular way. And it's also only 2 channels. And we've got other things within the portfolio now, such as ShowLink, where we can take remote controller devices, and users were just basically knocking our door down. Since I joined the business 8 years ago, right? When are you going to do a digital IM system? When are you going to do a 4-channel IM system? When are you going to do a IM system with digital inputs? When are we going to have ShowLink and the ability to remote control our packs within an IM system? ADPSM brings Axient Digital to the conversation. So people are very familiar with Axient Digital from the wireless microphone side. And the way that I describe it is it's all the things that you like about Axient Digital, but we put it in an IM system. So we've got Dante now. We've got various different ways of getting audio in and out of the box. So it'll do Dante, AES3, analog XLR, and TRS as well, which is fantastic. So it's very, very flexible from that perspective. It will ship as a dual or a quad, so you can have a 2 or a 4-channel solution. They are also unlockable. So you can actually unlock the quad to deliver you 16 channels if you want to. So you can do 16 channels in one rack. For certain applications, right, if that's something that you want to do, please talk to us about it first, because we want to make sure that you're doing it for the right reasons. There are various things about device redundancy that start to come in at that stage that we want to talk to you about, but it is theoretically possible. Cruise ship market, for example, loves the idea of device of 16 channels in one box. But actually, ADPSM is kind of 4 products now. So we're selling you 4 things. We're selling you a best-in-class, badass analog system. So you can build it as an analog FM system where the frequency modulation on both sides is synthesized within an FPGA, right? So PSM 1000 or other analog IM systems, all of that encoding and companding is done on hardware. Whereas in ADPSM, we've synthesized all of that. And that means that you can make it really, really, really good. So actually, it's the best analog IM system that we've ever produced. And in many respects, the best analog IM system that anyone's ever heard. It's fantastic. It's also a highly spectrally efficient WMAS digital system. It is also a very resilient narrowband digital system, and it's a point-to-point communication for Axient Digital rack devices. So you can have an 80 PSM rack transmitter and a Axient Digital rack receiver and hang a big pair of antennas on both of them and get them to communicate with each other over long distances.
Oh, cool.
So there may have been a recent parade within London to celebrate a big event that was of national pride. The color red was everywhere, where that particular solution was essential for making it work, because you've got, you know, wireless audio having to be transmitted between lots of different locations that are moving around, right? So that it's 4 solutions within one box for one low price.
And just to circle back to the WMAS conversation, like that was, I remember a couple of years ago, like I heard the term and then suddenly it seemed to be everywhere, be it for engineers to manufacturers, all kind of talking about this. So could you talk about how that's how it's kind of affected the kind of development of this latest system?
Absolutely. So WMAS arrived actually, you know, relatively recently. I think WMAS was approved by the regulators, and then 2 months later or something like that, we were shipping 80 PSM. Term WMAS stands for Wireless Multi-Channel Audio System. The concept of this came from the fact that basically all the manufacturers have been building the same thing for 50 years, right? We all have to adhere to the PMSE, Program Making and Special Events, PMSE audio standard for wireless, which gives you a 200 kilohertz carrier. So you make energy at a frequency. That frequency can shift down 100 kilohertz or up 100 kilohertz. So it can deviate across that center frequency over 200 kilohertz, and that's your footprint to make it do stuff, right? Just having a carrier isn't enough. You have to modulate it in some way in order to make it carry information.
Right.
And we have a 200 kilohertz footprint to do that. And that's what we all had, right? All the manufacturers working to that standard. And Axient Digital microphones kind of represents the most that you can pull out of that in terms of audio quality, latency, spectral efficiency.
Right.
And then WMAS starts to get, you know, socialized, and we were a big supporter in wireless multi-channel audio systems. And what the standard basically says is within the UHF spectrum, you can go 20 meg across the center frequency. So you can have a center frequency that can tune 10 meg down and 10 meg up.
Okay.
So that gives manufacturers a lot more leeway in terms of the mask that they deploy, is how we describe it, how much space that spectrum takes up. There's not 20 meg of spectrum available anywhere in the world, but we have a lot of leeway to build systems how we want. And it means that you can start to throw some pretty heavy concepts or some pretty new concepts at RF that we haven't seen before. The one that we're using within our 80 PSM system is called orthogonal frequency division multiplexing. Okay. Which, if you're in a pub and you want to sound clever, is a good one to commit to memory. Orthogonal frequency division multiplexing. What this means is we take up a wider spectrum, so we're 800 kilohertz rather than 200 kilohertz, and we subdivide that wider piece of spectrum into sub-channels.
Okay.
And each of those sub-channels are equidistant to each other, which is where the orthogonal bit kind of comes from, right? If you Google it, it kind of means like 90 degrees. So everything is just equidistant to each other. We do phase offsets within the sub-channels as well, and that allows us to have individuality with those sub-channels, even though if you look at it on a scope, it looks like contiguous spectrum. And now you can start to make your systems do some quite interesting things. So in WMAS, what we're doing is we're taking that 800 kilohertz carrier and we're sending 8 audio channels down it. All right, so that's 4 stereo mixes go down an 800 kilohertz carrier. Now, those boffins at home will know that anytime you do a combine like that in a transmitter, you will get some form of harmonic intermodulation, which is just noise, essentially, unwanted noise. And with an 80 PSM, all of that unwanted noise is dealt with within that 800 kilohertz carrier.
Right.
So I haven't found a better way to describe it than, and I apologize for this, like the meat of the carrier, the kind of important bit is 600 kilohertz.
Okay.
There's then a 100 kilohertz guard band either side where the intermods live. And once that's up on air, it's completely linear. And that means you can stack these things right on top of each other, and we can deliver you 80 mono channels within an 8 meg band.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But you don't have to use the whole 8 meg. You can use bits of the 8 meg, and that means that you can continue to coexist with other users. So within like your 8 meg provision, you could do 16 channels of IEM perhaps, and then another 8 channels of Axient Digital, and that's it. You're just kind of sorted.
Right,
You know, so the most spectrally inefficient part of the build has become the most spectrally efficient part of the build.
Okay.
And that's our implementation of it. It's not the only way that you have to do WMAS, but being an American company, the heart and soul of ADPSM was always going to be about spectral efficiency. And therefore, WMAS implementation for us was always going to be about making the most spectrally efficient product that we can and taking that advantage set out of WMAS and deploying it.
Okay. So it seemed like when ADPSM came out, you're offering, it's a whole toy box of tricks, basically.
Yes.
What was the initial response when it first, because it was 18 months ago that it first came out? What was the initial response from customers?
So we had ADPSM out on a number of very, very high profile shows that could not have achieved their channel count without that spectral efficiency. So, I could roll off a few. For example, you've already written about the likes of Oasis, for example, right? That was a huge ADPSM show that went out in 4-channel wideband. Those kind of shows require a couple of things. So for our WMAS provision to work really well, you want to be transmitting in it on 2 antennas with overlapping coverage. This is quite different in terms of how IEMs have always worked. Usually you have 1 antenna, and if you split that off into a second antenna, that's like the worst thing possible that you can do, because now you've got 2 antennas transmitting the same information on the same frequency. They start to cancel each other out. And weirdly, in ADPSM, you want 2 antennas on the same frequency in the same space, because what it does is it reinforces that OFDM mask and makes it very resilient on a stage.
Okay.
And what we started to see a lot out there was shows wanting to build simpler versions of this system. They didn't want to run multiple antennas onto a stage, or they wanted to try and use each antenna in a separate zone. And as soon as you separate that out and you have 2 separate kind of OFDM masks being transmitted in different areas, they start to become susceptible to negative impacts on the stage. The most socialized version of this was like drum kits and scraping metal objects is how we describe it. So drum kit, you've got a set of hi-hats there. Set hi-hats are separating and coming together. As that happens, the impedance across each metal plate, which is essentially what a hi-hat is, it's 2 metal plates, the impedance changes, and that impedance change is very quick, and that actually starts to modulate. So you generate interference around the drum kit just by the hi-hat exists, coming together. And the amount of interference varies depending on how, what the cymbals are made out of, how hard the drummer is, smashing the hi-hats together, basically. But what we were finding was on single antenna provisions of WMAS, we were starting to get negative impacts. And the only real way to solve that was to go back to 2 antennas in one zone.
Right.
Potentially running multiple sets of 2 antennas in one zone across your stage. And that's just not how users really wanted to deploy that system.
Yeah.
So we took that feedback on, and we have developed a new transmit mode, which we're calling single carrier narrowband. So this brings you all the sonic advantages of digital and the spectrum advantage of digital. I mean, it's 23 channels in an 8 meg band, so it's very, very spectrally efficient from that perspective. But you build it like a normal IM system. And basically, it's just a normal transmission. There's no OFDM, a single antenna, which you can passive split to cover 2 areas if that's what you want to do. We can make up the gain back to 40 milliwatts, which is where people want to be. And it's an extremely resilient digital RF transmission. So we've had it. I think a lot of the topic of this is going to be Tom Mish. Tom Mish is a really good example. They were the big beta tester of this for us. So we put the firmware on all their systems. They came to us and they said, the engineer, Jack Childs, had used ADPSM on another artist in 4-channel wideband, had definitely had some challenges with that particular topology because it's a very complex show. Running multiple antennas was a bit tricky. And we said, look, we can do it now off of a single antenna. Let's look at your build. Let's understand what it is that you're trying to do. Really good candidate for single carrier narrowband, and it went out on that tour without a hitch. It's been really, really stable across that whole show. Unbreakable, essentially, I would say, on all the stuff that I've seen it on. And we love trying to break RF systems. It's the first thing that we try and do. How can we make this system as bad as possible? What happens if we unplug an antenna from the ADXR pack? What happens if we move 250 meters away from the transmit antenna? What happens if we move the transmit antenna to face a wall, right? These are things that we tend to do when we're proving resiliency in systems, and single carrier narrowband is even including analog or FM in some senses, the most resilient mode that box has. Like, it's really difficult to break it.
Yeah.
So we've addressed that customer desire to have a much simpler system that is extremely reliable, that you can just kind of set and forget and go off and do other things.
It's interesting because I just for years when you've been talking to RF technicians especially, the big worry for a long time was LED screens and things causing problems, but to have something like a drum kit being that, not the thorn in the side, so to speak, but just like it's something maybe it wasn't considered originally, or maybe it had been considered just.
I mean, it's funny, like, when we first started digging into that specific issue, that what it results in is this new term that started to get socialized called EVM. And you started to see on, like, Reddit forums and stuff, EVM noise. And I think that got slightly confused as to what it really is. It's EVM stands for error vector magnitude.
Okay.
Every digital system on the market measures the errors that it gets in terms of the system, in terms of error vector magnitude. What is the magnitude of those errors that are coming in? Yeah. And every single digital system on the market will pick up errors because it's how digital systems work. Your mobile phone has error vector magnitude, right? Axient Digital handheld and body pack transmitters has an element of error vector magnitude. The drum kit scenario was quite extreme for ADPSM because your receiver pack is basically having the hardest task on that stage. It's buried in costume. It's really far away from the antenna. You don't get line of sight to it. It's on stubby antennas, so it is diversity, but it's not like a nice pair of antennas on the rack. And I think what was interesting was, customers started to really learn about the fact that there's lots of things on your stage that generate noise. LED screens has always been one, but there's loads of stuff now. Motors, lighting fixtures, right? Moving stage elements. There's lots of kind of cases now on a modern complex production that can generate these sorts of things for you. And releasing a digital IEM system in this market, it's critical that you get it right, and it's critical that you have places to go. And single carrier narrowband presents for us the most robust version of deploying that on a complex stage and counteracting all of those challenges that you would see out there.
Because that's the other interesting as well, that you can talk about touring at the highest level. You mentioned Oasis, that's such a big production. With that setup, they had 2 monitor engineers and obviously a whole RF team as well. But when you are talking about, the Tom Misch example, when it is, from what I understand, a monitor engineer also essentially being the RF technician as well. This more kind of, I don't want to call it plug and play because I do appreciate it is still a kind of complex science doing RF, but it seems that with these latest updates, it is a bit more simplistic for these kind of level of tours when you do have, I'm the monitor engineer, I'm also my own monitor tech, and I'm also the RF technician as well. Yeah,
I think that the goal with ADPSM now is to give you a product that can basically do anything that you throw at it. So if you're an owner-operator and you want a simple life, then you put it all in single carrier narrowband, bang it into a combiner, bang it into an antenna, and it's the best IM system that you've ever used. If your artist suddenly says, I like the sound of analog, you can just switch all that over to analog and it's a job done. But if you're working on a complex stadium production where you have not a lot of spectrum to play with, so you need to be very spectrally efficient, but you also want to know exactly what frequency a certain artist is on, you can mix and match these different operational modes within a single topology. So it becomes quite complex at that stage. You can really take this system down a path where you're making something really, really complicated and you're hanging lots of antennas. And that build is required for shows of that level because what they have is a 0 to no tolerance for failure. They have to tour it in multiple different countries where there are different spectral availabilities, and they have to guarantee a level of operation for a relatively small number of channels, So having the ability to turn on and off these features in different bits of hardware becomes really, really beneficial. And there are RF engineers and designers for shows that are using all of them, And with this firmware, we haven't just done a single carrier narrowband update. We've put in a new Q mode, which allows you to Q scroll between all these operational modes. We've developed some other methods in terms of, how we control these systems from Wireless Workbench. We are looking at other ways in which we can improve that as well. So it's all about usability. And as you say, it's the most difficult task, having your cake and eating it too, giving a simple solution to those shows that just need simplicity and for it to go out and to be the easiest system they've ever used. But also let it be deployed in some very complex cases and having, tools available that are ultimately complex in order to achieve that.
I mean, talking of complex cases, I mean, obviously, we're in the middle of summer right now, and we can talk about tours, but at least they usually have the kind of the run of a building for a day. But obviously, when we're talking about festivals, it's a whole other kind of ball game in terms of kind of making sure you have enough spectrum for all these kind of touring artists come in. Could you talk about how the ADPSM is going to be beneficial for touring artists going into the big festival scenes with events with multiple acts?
Yep. If you're ADPSM, you're everyone's best friend right now because you have a very, very spectrally efficient product. So if you're on a complex festival site, that WMAS mode is amazing because what would usually take potentially 2 meg of spectrum to deploy, you can now do in 800 kilohertz and continue to coexist with others. So if you're in an arena, I mean, we were just out in France for Hellfest, and that bowl is pretty big, and there's a lot of crosstalk between some of those stages. So you do have to make certain decisions. I mean, we weren't doing the RF engineering, somebody else was, but we were given some access into terms of how that works. And yeah, your narrowband provisions are quite complex to kind of map around in terms of intermods. ADPSM is quite easy because it's linear and you can fit things in and be very, very spectrally efficient. So yeah, from that perspective, it's everyone's best friend. And as we're seeing festival season play out, and you're seeing some of the LinkedIn posts now that are going out from a lot of the coordinators. They are saying it's the hardest one they've ever done this festival season because of the types of kit that are coming in and the levels of things that are being bought by the artists. Like lots of artists own their own stuff now. They're not using in-house things. Having to deal with that in terms of the tech advance and then the deployment. Right. It's been a very tricky year. And we're in a Glastonbury fallow year. So arguably, this is the easiest that it's going to be for the next 4 years. I'm very interested to see what happens when Glastonbury comes back next year, and the kind of things that people bring with them.
And this is more kind of like I'm not asking you to divulge any secrets or anything, but what are some of the other kind of challenges that are coming down the pipe when it comes to kind of general kind of like use of RF in the world of live touring?
I think the biggest one that I see now, we were talking about this earlier, right? We're prepping for a big training today, and the networking of these systems is going to be a large element of that training.
Right.
So like RF is complex in its own way, but we are also the most network heavy department on the show. I'm going to say that, and somebody is going to absolutely like throw something out of the window. But like in terms of the hardware endpoints that we deal with, like an RF system might have 100 components that you have to aggregate into a network. I mean, we're building a relatively simple system next door today, but we still have like 3 24-port AV line switches to support that if you want to do a run home per device. That gives you complexity in terms of just once everything's in the network, the way that communication between a computer and a piece of hardware happens. You want to make sure that it's very well formulated. You don't want all of your 100 devices to flood the network with communication at one time. And that means that we have to work with switch manufacturers to design IGMP protocols and to do certain management within the switch to make sure that we space all of that communication out over a longer period. So I don't know of any other part in the show that has to deal with it in the same way as us. Like my understanding is that the PA provision is a relatively small number of endpoints on your Dante system, for example. The control for that is much smaller in terms of the number of devices. Your Shure hardware will encompass receivers, transmitters, combiners, batteries. Within the ShowLink infrastructure as well, it will now have handheld transmitters, body pack transmitters, body pack receivers. It just goes up and up and up and up. And somebody has to manage all that hardware. Yeah. Somebody has to manage how it all gets into the network as well. So that bit is very interesting to me. And as we move into, I'm not going to divulge what's on the roadmap, but a big discussion now is network capability, network expectation, and network resilience. How do you achieve all of those three things within future versions of product that we will manufacture?
I mean, it's something we hear from kind of people on the road all the time, being that like the need within kind of a lot of touring productions is a network engineer, and that being less of a someone from the audio department that's kind of become their role, but like a bit more of an official role to deal with this. Do you agree? Do you think that's going to be kind of coming down the pipe?
I think it's already there. I think if you look at a lot of the big shows that, for instance, Claire are putting out, Claire will, all of the Claire network builds that I see are fantastic. And clearly somebody has really thought about how that network has to run. They have a specific IP address for every single piece of hardware that they own everywhere around the world. So the decision about how Claire deploys its network is a global decision, right? It's not just a show decision. It's like, this is the standard of how we work. So I think you already see a lot of it. I think that manufacturers that aren't just Shure, that are building wireless systems, are now starting to look at networks in different ways.
Okay.
And particularly around moving audio around and how, an audio network for a complex show works. That has impacts on future uses for people over the next few years. That also comes with network knowledge requirement is what I'm saying. So like, as soon as you take the decision to put all of your audio on the network, you have to understand what that network is doing, and you have to understand what it's saying to you. And there are companies that have people that are very good at figuring that bit out. I also know a lot of engineers that love plugging in an analog XLR and plugging it in there and then plugging it in there and go, yes, that's that, it's done.
Yeah.
So I think it does get more complex, and I think that is driven by the increasing complexities of shows in general. But I also don't want to get away from the fact that, mid-scale touring still relies on analog interconnects, and we still service that market with Axient Digital as well. So I don't think we'll ever move into a world where it's all on the network. I think that it will always be a requirement that you can put your product in the analog realm within the hardware. I'm going to make that statement as me rather than Shure, because I don't actually know what our view on that is. But certainly in terms of what I see, I don't see that requirement ever going anywhere. People are always going to want to run an XLR in.
Yeah. And again, a bit more of a kind of general question, but it seems that obviously there's a lot of manufacturers out there kind of like going about this issue of the need to kind of work within this limited spectrum in different ways. Is there a need for a kind of a bit more of a standardization? Because it seems like you can go about, creating a show in multiple different ways.
Yeah, we would love a standardization, but that's just not where the market's at right now. The market is, there are Dante, AES3, STM, like there's loads. And the feedback we get is that people would like us to support all of them, right. Which is tricky. So I don't see a standardized way of doing it coming. I think that people are just going to have to get used to working within different languages and different standards, and ultimately, if you're good at figuring that out, then you'll get work, and that'll be how these things run, right? Yeah,
fair. And obviously, with the kind of more advanced ADPSM, it all came from like kind of customer feedback and be like, right, let's fix some solutions and kind of some more kind of firmware updates, etc. If there are kind of Shure customers out there, what's kind of the advice you give them in terms of kind of getting in touch with you if they've got more feedback in terms of future development?
Yeah, so we are a very friendly company. We have a whole department called market development, which is specifically designed to communicate with the end user.
Right, okay.
So I don't manage any accounts. There's no sales target from that perspective. Like it's not how we work. My entire job is to go out and talk to the people that ultimately use the products. So if you want to get in touch with somebody and you don't currently have a contact, LinkedIn, Shure Market Development, just connect with literally anybody that pops up and ask that question. Shure's great because we have people pretty much everywhere. So obviously we're very well established in the UK. We have a specific office. We have an office in Germany. We have people in France, people in Spain, people in Italy. Obviously, people all over America. We got offices in Japan, South Korea, China. We have places in India, in Dubai. And we are, I think one of the only people that can service a tour all the way from America to the UK, to Europe, to Japan, to China, back to wherever, you started, right? We can put you in touch with people all the way along that chain. And we all speak to each other, we all know each other, and whatever feedback you want to give us will always go into the great Shure machine. So get in touch with anybody that you find with a market development job title anywhere you are in the world. We'll find a way to get in touch with you.
Cool. And last thing, what's the rest of summer looking like for you?
It's busy, relatively quiet given that it's a fallow year, I guess, like for Glastonbury. But that doesn't seem to have let up the amount of work that I see going out there. Everyone that I speak to says that they're quite busy, that stuff's going out the door, which is really, really good. For me, it's a lot of product training. So we are doing a training session tomorrow. I will be doing an RF coordinators training within the next few weeks as well. And lots of artists that have just gone onto ADPSM looking for, us to come on site and just look over the system. We're going to be doing a fair bit of that. So I've got a lot of site visits lined up, which are literally just a case of we put this system in, we built it. Can you let us know what you think? Can you let us know if there's any tips and tricks that you would have? And I know that my colleagues in Germany and Spain are doing the same thing as well. So lots of time out with the artists and the customers.
Thank you. Well, thanks very much for having us in this wonderful space. And let's speak soon.
Pleasure. Thanks, Steve.